Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. What a great day you've picked to join us here today. We have got a lot to do. Before we're done, Eddie returns today. What is that all about? Maybe we'll get some clues on that here in just a little bit. Also, special guest joins us at the end of the show, too. Our good friend Kaylee Manziel going to pop by, previewing big week of coverage next week for DawgNation at the Senior Bowl, as a lot of former Dogs take a step towards their NFL future. Speaking of guests, Jeff Sentell is here today. A lot of recruiting news to get with him on the show, including the topic we begin with, the future of Georgia and Jared Curtis. One-time Georgia commit, now kind of broadening things out, but Georgia in hot pursuit. We have evidence of that here today. And in addition to that, we're going to ask what I think is a pretty provocative question about the future of Gunner Stockton. We presume Georgia's starting quarterback for 2025. But exactly what will that look like? Experts, people far smarter than me, will give you their thoughts on that, at least in one respect, coming up here in just a little bit. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, I think there's an interesting question to be asked about exactly what it's going to look like with Gunner Stockton if he is indeed, as we expect him to be, Georgia's starting quarterback in 2025. We're going to get to that here coming up in a couple of minutes. But prior to that, let me begin with this. One of the things we'll talk to Jeff Sentell about when he joins us here in just a moment is what appears to be a very busy stretch as of late for some Georgia coaches, including Kirby Smart himself. Photographic evidence coming out this week that Smart takes an in-home visit with the five-star quarterback from 2026, the one-time Georgia commit, stepping away from that Georgia commitment a couple of months ago, broadening things out, recently putting out a top six, which did include Georgia, but also five other suitors who are apparently in close contact with this quarterback as well. Of course, I'm talking about Jared Curtis. Let me show you this on the screen here for a moment if you're watching on video, and if you're not, I'll describe it to you. Jeff Sentell sharing this from his X account yesterday. Kind of a big visit here, Jeff says, as far as January in-homes go. Kirby Smart in Nashville to check on five-star quarterback target Jared Curtis. Jeff reporting that the Dogs will get an official visit in mid-June, aiming to earn a recommitment from Curtis. So there you see Kirby cheesing with Jared Curtis, the five-star quarterback. Georgia clearly staying in hot pursuit of Curtis, even after Curtis sort of backed off his Georgia commitment, opened things up, and even in light of the fact that we would certainly imagine this is a very heavy NIL-level recruitment. So let me talk about two things here for a moment, and one of these is sort of tangible. The other one maybe perhaps a little bit more symbolic. Pretty clearly, Georgia has made Curtis among the focal points for its 2026 recruiting class, and very early on, and to me it seems kind of weird to be taking the in-home as early as this is. I'll ask Jeff Sentell if that's maybe not the case, but seems pretty early for an in-home from the head coach. Only gets, I believe, one of those. Kind of early to be doing that, but also laying the groundwork for, as Jeff says, when you get to the summer, the warm weather months, when all these official visits start happening, obviously Georgia's going to put a lot in the direction of Jared Curtis. So pretty clearly, was it last week we sort of took a little bit of a cynical view in all this of things seem to be going the wrong direction for Georgia with Curtis after having at one point in time been the school holding the commitment to now being among six schools that sort of squeezed into a graphic. You know, you don't love the direction all that's going. But obviously, when you see Kirby Smart in home, you realize how hard Georgia's looking to fight for the five-star quarterback here right now. So that's the sort of on-the-ground specifics of this. Jeff Sentell will give us more on that coming up in a moment. But there's also the symbolic thing to this. And I had a listener, and I'm sorry I don't have his name in front of me, but he sent this to me, an interesting story. I'm imagining we'll probably do more on this next week. It comes from The Ringer. Do you know The Ringer? It's a website, Bill Simmons' outfit. Simmons, of course, the famous longtime podcast host, you know, kind of sports personality. So what this story written by Joel Anderson says is that Ohio State became this year the first NIL national champion, kind of a national champion crown in the NIL era, powered a lot by that name, image, likeness, revenue for its players. That's what Anderson says of Ohio State. And the DawgNation Daily listener to me, and I'm sorry I don't have the name in front of me. I apologize for that. But he said, hey, when's Kirby Smart going to win his first NIL national championship? I think it's a fair question. Obviously, we would say the landscape of the sport has really very much changed. It's just different than it used to be. And while some of that change is a change for the worse, I think overall Georgia fans themselves don't necessarily need to be afraid of what's coming here from the standpoint of how competitive Georgia can be, because we're led to believe that Georgia, while it may not be spending the most money of anybody, and it may not have the access to the most money of any program, it is certainly kind of right there in the same ballpark with everybody else, and it's certainly not a pauper when it comes to this sort of thing. And the presence of Kirby with a quarterback like Curtis, because you can let your mind wander here, and your educated guess might not be too far off about how much money it might take to bring in a guy like Curtis for the class of 2026. But the fact that Kirby is standing there in Jared's living room this week leads you to believe that Georgia wants to play that game, thinks that it can be as competitive as anybody else, making those lucrative offers to incoming freshmen or transfers or whatever else. So we have talked a lot about the money Ohio State spent to put the roster together that led it to a national championship here this year. Georgia fans, including the one who wrote to me, asking the fair question of, will we now see Georgia do the same thing? And the presence of Kirby Smart in home with Jared Curtis suggests that Georgia does want to play the game at the same level that everybody else does, and we'll see how much evidence we see of that coming up in the months and perhaps years to come. So more on that, I'm sure, in future days, but kind of an interesting way to kick things off here today. Kirby in home with Jared Curtis, and we'll pay very close attention to all the stuff that's attached to a recruitment like that here in the class of 2026. Now, with that said, we'll do more Jared Curtis with Jeff here in a moment. Let me shift gears now, though, to something for the most part completely different. The quarterback that Georgia is expected to have here for 2025 is, of course, Gunner Stockton. I do expect Stockton to be Georgia's starting quarterback. They may bring in some quarterback depth through the portal at some point in time, but that's not a guy that I think is going to be, taking over, barring injury or something like that, as the starting quarterback. My assumption is this will be Gunner's team here next season. And there's a lot of optimism that Gunner can be an outstanding quarterback for Georgia. We've now seen 6 quarters from him against, college football playoff level teams in the semifinals of the college football playoff. And I would say in all 6 of those quarters, Gunner Stockton really sort of looked the part. In fact, you want to go back a couple of weeks ago on our show, we had a chance to ask Jake Fromm, who obviously knows what it takes to be the starting quarterback at Georgia, of course. We had a chance to ask Jake about what he had seen from Gunner in the Sugar Bowl. And I'm always willing to kind of lean on the people who know more about this than I do. Jake, I believe, is one of those guys. Jake, very complimentary of what we saw from Gunner in his debut as a starter. This is from our show a couple of weeks ago. Here's Jake Fromm.
Man, I loved Gunner's debut because there was no fear in his eyes at all. Man, he didn't blink. He came out ripping the football, and even when they got down, there's a quick jump. All of a sudden, they're in this football game, and now they're down by 2 touchdowns. Man, he didn't blink. He just kept it ripping. Man, I loved kind of what he was doing and how he was playing. You could see in his body language, man, that he's a competitive football player, competitive dude. Man, and I'm excited about the future of Georgia football with Gunner at the helm.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting from Jake Fromm. And I think what most of us would sort of say, we have kind of seen some version of the same thing. I think the phrasing that Jake uses there is really compelling when he talks about there being no fear in Gunner's eyes. Now, that's one of those sort of intangible things. It's a little bit hard to describe and define. And, who knows how real some of that is. But the vibe that Jake says he saw from Gunner, I would say that I saw too. Gunner Stockton pretty clearly looked like a guy who was very comfortable making his first start. And that is not an easy thing to do. Big playoff game, unusual week, huge spotlight, and Gunner Stockton was pretty relaxed in all of that. We had a chance to talk to him, kind of leading into the game, and you ask him about, what's it like to get so much attention, and he just sort of shrugged it all off. And sometimes that sort of aw shucks veneer, when you see it from somebody, led to believe it may be inauthentic or something like that. But in the case of Gunner Stockton, there's sort of every reason to believe that he really is the real deal in terms of just kind of open-eyed, but also kind of relaxed persona as he approaches the very big job of being the Georgia starting quarterback, something that's not always a particularly easy thing to do. You know, Gunner seems to be handling that all pretty well and in kind of a fearless way, the way that Jake Fromm described. But specifically, though, what about what Gunner will actually look like? This is where I think things get kind of interesting, because it seems like to me we saw Gunner a lot more willing to run against Texas in the SEC championship than we saw from him against Notre Dame in the college football playoff, the Sugar Bowl, just a few weeks ago. That Gunner actually in that game did not run as much as I thought he would. Now, maybe that's just me incorrectly thinking that he was going to run more than he was. This may not be Gunner's issue. It may be my issue, assuming incorrectly they would be using him more that way. But one of the things that we've explored on the show a little bit the last couple of weeks, and maybe you've missed some of this, but to me this is one of the more intriguing questions about Stockton ahead of next year is how much of a running quarterback is Gunner Stockton really going to be? Like, how much will we see Gunner Stockton use his legs? And in that same interview from a couple of weeks ago, and the clip you just heard from Jake, I followed up on that point asking Jake that. And Jake, I would say, knows Gunner pretty well. And I asked him, Jake, is Gunner Stockton a running quarterback? Will we see him running more in the future? And are you surprised he did not run more against Notre Dame? Once again, here's Jake Fromm.
Yeah, kind of a little bit of yes and a no. Like I think Gunner is a very, very good and talented athlete. But I don't think Gunner is by any means Lamar Jackson, and giving Lamar Jackson 8 to 12 carries a game. I think Gunner is very good with his legs. But man, when you're playing good and high caliber football teams, man, speed matters, and those running lanes really collapse very, very quickly. So I think Gunner is a lot better with his arm than he is with his legs, and I think he'll have a longer career, quite frankly, if he kind of uses his arm more than his legs. But don't get me wrong, in this game of college football, the way it is today, having a guy who can do both at the quarterback position is huge. Yeah. And I think Georgia's offense will benefit from that moving forward next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think to follow up on Jake saying there, I do think we're at a point now where most Georgia fans want the quarterback for UGA to have some rushing ability. Like, I'll use Will Howard from Ohio State as an example of that, to kind of use the same comparison that Jake just used. I don't know that we're going to confuse Will Howard with Lamar Jackson either, but against Notre Dame, he did have 16 carries for 57 yards. That's a little bit of an offensive supplement that, if nothing else, just gives the defense something else they have to think about. That's an element I think we would like Georgia to have with Gunner Stockton, that ability to just make the defense at least pay attention to it. That's one of the reasons why some people think the rushing game with the running backs kind of opened up a little bit more in the SEC championship, because all of a sudden now Texas can't just key on the traditional running plays. They have to have their eyes on Stockton too. And that extra dimension, that extra element to the running game is one of those things, or just the offense overall is one of those things I think a lot of Georgia fans would like to see Georgia have. But is that the sort of thing that Gunner Stockton can provide? You heard Jake Fromm weigh in on that from a couple of weeks ago. Terrence Edwards, also a former Georgia player and also a sharp coaching mind now, he also kind of shared his thoughts on Gunner as a runner, not to be too much of a poet here, Gunner as a runner, and maybe why there wasn't more of that against Notre Dame. Here's Terrence Edwards.
Yes, after watching Gunner in high school, he's more than capable of being a quarterback that can move the chains with his legs, with design runs, or just being able to escape the pocket. I think we didn't do that in the Sugar Bowl because of, if he got hurt, then we had to bring Ryan in or whoever's the backup, and that's less experience than what we got. So maybe that was one of the reasons we didn't go to the quarterback run as much, just because the lack of depth behind Gunner. I don't know. I would have thought going into that situation that we would have run Gunner more than we did. So it just a wait and see. Do Georgia want to run the running back as much? I mean, I've watched the national championship game, and Notre Dame quarterback, in my opinion, was done after that first drive with them running him that many times and playing in the SEC. You know, that's tough playing against this talent, the way these guys run, how big they are, being able to run your quarterback as much as they did. So, yes, I would like to see some design runs, especially in the red zone, short yardage, but I don't think that could be a recipe for success for Gunner Stockton.
You know, at the end there, Terrence mentions the sort of red zone, short yardage stuff. And that's where I think this conversation gets really interesting, because if you want to go back to the starting quarterback, you know, prior to Carson Beck, obviously Stetson Bennett, you know, kind of an all-time great, a guy who became a Heisman finalist. We think of him as kind of a running quarterback, and obviously he was incredibly athletic. The overall rushing yards, not necessarily incredible, ran for 259 yards in 2021, 205 yards in 2022. That's more than the typical Georgia quarterback, perhaps, but it's not exactly, once again, Lamar Jackson, Michael Vick type, you know, rushing game feat. But the thing that Stetson Bennett did so well in 2022, in his final year at Georgia, he had 10 rushing touchdowns. Do you know how valuable that is? 10 rushing touchdowns that in the red zone, in a short yardage situation where the passing lanes get a lot more narrow, where the defense gets a chance to crowd a lot more towards the line of scrimmage. It's just sort of harder to score in a short yardage red zone situation. But if your quarterback can take it in himself, that becomes a lot easier. And that's one of the things that Stetson Bennett really did. So to sort of sum all this up, how much of a running quarterback will Gunner Stockton be? Both Jake Fromm and Terrence Edwards saying, hey, maybe not quite as much as some people would like. Fair enough. But could he be the presence in the red zone in a short yardage situation? You know, could he provide some of the rushing touchdown totals that Stetson Bennett once did? If he can, that's an incredible boost for the Georgia offense. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're glad you're with us. However you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Rep. Podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really glad to have you as a part of our program today. Fun show on tap. Two great guests here in a moment. Before we're done, special appearance by Kaylee Manziel. Next week, big week for DawgNation, coverage of the Senior Bowl in Mobile. So Kaylee will sort of set the stage for that for us a little bit. We'll have some fun with that, and Jeff Sentell here in just a moment, too. And, of course, on Fridays for a long time, our staple has been our friends at Kroger. We are so thankful for their longtime partnership with us here at DawgNation. And it's not just they help us keep the lights on, the studio rolling. It's not just that, but we love what they do for you, too. Giving you back more time to enjoy the things you love in life, giving you more money to just make your life work the way that it's supposed to. That's what Kroger's all about. And one of the great ways they do that is through their membership program called Kroger Boost. And you have a chance to sort of try that right now and get a great experience with that. Find out why the things that you're already buying at Kroger can save you big time money at the fuel pump, because, you know, normally, you know, you're getting like basically a point for every dollar you spend in Kroger. But when it comes to Kroger Boost, you get twice that. You get double the fuel points. That's 2 fuel points for every dollar spent right there at your local Kroger. You can also take advantage of free grocery delivery, free pickup, all kinds of convenient options for you on that. So become a member of Kroger Boost today. It's online, Kroger.com/boost. Find out more about that. Kroger.com/boost to find out more about that today. So I told you we got great guests here coming up. Jeff in a moment, Kaylee after that. Prior to that, I want to go around the DawgHouse. And it's presented today by Zagoria Law. We're thankful to have them. But I do have to tell you that this is going to be a slight shift in the tone of the discussion here for a moment. There's a guy on Twitter that I really like. The handle's called DawgStats, just DawgStats, at DawgStats on Twitter. And one of the things that he has done as of late that I think is really pretty interesting, and it's far beyond my capabilities. Like I've never been good at stuff like this, but he used like a lot of Excel spreadsheet, things like that, you know, very sort of math-oriented person. And one of the things that he's been tabulating for Georgia and some other SEC teams is the returning production they're going to have for the upcoming year. And to give you a little bit of a backstory on this just for a moment, in sort of an old school line of thinking in college football, one of the things that you paid attention to were who are your returning starters? Who are your returning starters? We always kind of talk about that. At least we, we used to, years ago. Who are your returning starters? But in the sort of modern college football game, the notion of returning starters is a little bit, I think, of an antiquated idea, because look at your defense here for a moment. About half the time in the SEC, probably more than half the time, you're kind of playing with a nickel back in the game. That's a fifth defensive back. That means that you have completely different formations depending on if you have the extra defensive backs in the game or not. So from that standpoint, who really counts as a starter and who doesn't? Same thing for, you're rotating along the defensive line. The guys that you're kind of bringing in on a rotational basis, we would say for the most part, are almost as important as the guys who were, in the game to begin the game. Just because you're in the game on the first snap doesn't mean you're more important than the guys that rotate in. Same thing defense, where you got or I should say on offense, where sometimes you got 2 tight end sets, sometimes you got 4 receivers in the game, sometimes you got, some teams even use 2 running backs. That just the definition of a starter is just not quite what it once was. And so what guys like our buddy Dog Stats have done is to say, okay, well, instead of sort of measuring, who's in the game for the first snap, let's measure the stats that players are responsible for and what percentage of those snaps is returning for the upcoming year. Now, if you want to take a deep dive into all of this and get the interesting information, you can find him on Twitter at DawgStats, as I said before. But I want to show you this on the screen because he kind of gives us a little bit of a word of warning here for a moment. And what he says is that I'm not quite so sure Georgia fans are ready for, if you've ever heard of Bill Connelly from ESPN, if you ever heard, I'm not really quite so sure Georgia fans are ready for Bill Connelly's returning production column to drop. And he gives you some numbers for Georgia. Now, not everybody's sort of into the sort of deep part of the stats. I won't get into this too much, but what Dog Stats kind of put out in a big spreadsheet, and if you go to his account, you can see more of this yourself, is that Georgia right now ranks among the lowest in the SEC, and we can bring that down now, that's fine, among the lowest in the SEC in terms of the percentage of snaps for offensive linemen, stats receiving for wide receivers, rushing for running backs, obviously quarterback snaps, same type of deal for defense, that Georgia is bringing back among the least returning production of almost anybody in the SEC right now, according to some data that our buddy Dog Stats already been tabulating. And Bill Connelly, the writer for ESPN, this is the sort of thing that kind of made him somewhat famous in a lot of college football circles too. And in a few days, he will be kind of putting out some of his data. Have you ever heard of like the SP Plus analytics rating formula? That's what Connelly does. And returning production is one of the things that Connelly factors into that for a lot of his preseason ratings, sort of the kind of like the calculator math, advanced stats type of deal. And one of the things that Connelly has said for a long time is that if you bring back a lot of returning production from previous year, that correlates with typically more success in an upcoming season. And if you bring back less, that correlates with a little bit of a regression. That makes sense to us. Common sense would assume that's probably true. Connelly says that it is. And Dog Stats on Twitter says right now Georgia's on kind of the wrong end of the spectrum when it comes to returning production for next year. We can think on our own mind and say, okay, yeah, no Trevor Etienne, no Carson Beck, no Jalen Walker, no Mikael Williams, no Malachi Starks. You can sort of run through, losing a lot of offensive linemen, including your 3 interior guys. You can kind of run through all this yourself and realize, oh yeah, boy, Georgia does have a lot to replay. So all of that is to simply say this. We're going to have a lot of conversations coming up in the weeks and months to come about the reasons for optimism and breakout season for so-and-so, and excited to see the next step being taken by another player here. There'll be plenty of those discussions, and all of them will be legitimate. And Georgia's going to be among the best odds to win the national championship, the highest over-under totals, all the way to early top 25s. Georgia's going to be at or near the top of all of those. But in addition to that, we also have to confront the reality here that Dog Stats tells us that, you know what, one of the statistical harbingers for success or not, Georgia's on kind of the wrong end of that right now. Georgia does not have a lot of returning production coming back, which means this spring, in the summer, in the calendar year that takes place prior to next fall, Georgia is going to have a lot of work to do to get a lot of guys ready to play a whole bunch more in 2025 than they've ever played in the past. And that is Around the DawgHouse here today on DawgNation Daily. Of course, Around the DawgHouse brought to you by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, speaking of Zagoria Law. Our friends at Zagoria Law have done a great job of really narrowing their focus on a very specific element of personal injury law. And we understand that, listen, if you've been hurt or injured in an accident, of course you kind of want the compensation for that. But sometimes there are other ways to be wrong. There are other ways to suffer an injury. Sometimes, let's say you're walking in a park and a dog gets free and it bites you, or in your own neighborhood, sometimes that kind of thing can happen, or just sort of out of nowhere at any point in time on the public. Something like that can occur. Well, our friends at Zagoria Law have been studying the aspects of the law related to these sorts of things, and they serve people who have been harmed, bitten, injured, something like that, when it comes to dogs. And they are now recognized as the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. They've literally written the book on how to win these sorts of cases, getting you the proper compensation you deserve if you or someone you love has been injured in this situation. We always love people who kind of specialize in an area because we believe there's additional expertise that comes your way when you kind of narrow your focus in that regard, and that's exactly what Zagoria Law is all about. So I want you to give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's ZAGORIA, ZagoriaLaw.com for a lot more on that. Zagoria Law bringing around the DawgHouse to us here today. All right, so we're still waiting on Jeff Sentell. Let me tap dance here just for a second. We'll try to keep the train on the tracks pretty good after that. So for quite some time now, we've been telling you that this was the day that Eddie, our mascot here for DawgNation Daily, Eddie the Blind Squirrel, would be returning. That is going to happen. If you're watching on video, you'll see it. And if you're listening on podcast, I'll describe it to you. Before we're done today, Eddie will be with us, and Eddie has brought something today. Now, what does all of this mean? I think that'll probably be revealed to us maybe coming up in the months to come. But Eddie is back today. We'll have an update on that. And as I mentioned to you a moment ago, a special guest before we're done today, too, Kaylee Mansell, going to stop by. Kaylee's a good friend of ours, so we never need a reason to have Kaylee on the show, but we do have one today. Kaylee also going to be a part of our DawgNation coverage in Mobile next week for the Senior Bowl. We'll let Kaylee tell us more about what that's going to look like, the former Dogs who are there. So we'll have some fun with that. Also, a lot to get to in terms of a busy football weekend, one of our final busy football weekends. So we'll cover some of that here in just a little bit, too. But for now, Jared Curtis, Kirby Smart in his home this week. Other rumblings and grumblings for the class of 2026. Let's cover all of that and more with Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, let's talk to Jeff Sentell about when it comes to this class of 2026. We'll do that here in a little bit. Jeff, before we do that, though, I want to bring you into a discussion we were just having. And that involves, listen, there's a lot of reason for optimism for Georgia in 2025, excitement about breakout players. We love all that kind of stuff. We'll always be into those sort of discussions, but we also try to be as, authentic and genuine as we can. And as we were just kind of sharing a moment ago, there will be a little bit of concern for Georgia in terms of the experience that it brings back, and at least to a couple of measuring sticks, perhaps among the least experienced SEC teams for next season. That is not an easy thing to overcome. It's not impossible to overcome either, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to overcome. You've covered, obviously, a lot of these guys as recruits, and now their moment could arrive in 2025. How much do you think Georgia's going to be leaning on a lot of these newcomers, whether it be, second-year players who didn't play very much as freshmen, incoming freshmen who may be called upon to step up and play a big role? How much can Georgia rely on some of that young talent here for this upcoming season?
Well, morning, everybody. Brandon, man, I just think it's the new normal. The way I've looked at it, the way I've tracked it, I think I put a tweet up a while back where something on social media where I kind of took a look at, Georgia has seen its NFL guys move on, its seniors move on. You've seen portal guys move on. And for me, man, your whole roster is basically your freshmen, redshirt freshmen, and sophomores. That's basically what it is. I looked back, and it's absurd to think that anybody from 2020 will still be around, even though Georgia had somebody from 2019 around in Xavier Truss last year. There's only one guy, Brandon, left from the 2021 class. That's Micah Morris. There's probably 14 left from the 2022 class. They've either portaled or retired from football or what have you. And Brandon, that's just the new normal. I think Kirby Smart was actually somewhat of a harbinger when he was sitting there in a couple press conferences like a year ago. He said, man, the way you look at it, everybody's probably at spring practice. This is only their first, second, or third spring practice, and that's about it. And you don't have those guys that have kind of waited around for a long time and bided their time. I think maybe the growing area, the big glaring area for me, Brandon, is offensive line. You're going to turn over at least 3, maybe 4 new starters for the 2025. But I think we've reached a point, Brandon, where Georgia has been so absurdly blessed at the offensive line that you just can't simply signify experience and say, oh, wow, the Dogs will be great up front, because this year you had all that and it didn't happen. And probably it's good to be talking about breakouts. It's good to be talking about, how Georgia can be different and better and maybe more exciting in 2025. I think it all still starts with a run game, because as long as I've been covering the Dogs and watching the Dogs, hope springs eternal for the Georgia Bulldogs when they have a stout run game and not one of those that's like at the bottom of the conference like we saw last year.
No, I think that's interesting. And, you use the phrase new normal. I believe that's 100% true. And like 2 things come to mind for me. Thing number 1 is this. We may watch Jalen Carter dominate the NFC Championship game on Sunday. He's essentially been a dominant force in this playoffs here thus far. He was also a backup defensive lineman for Georgia in 2021. That ain't ever happening again. No team in the history of college football for the rest of humanity. No team will ever have a backup defensive lineman the caliber of Jalen Carter the way that Georgia did in 2021. That level of depth just doesn't exist anymore. So I do think that Georgia fans have to recalibrate here of, oh, my gosh, we've lost so much, and, Georgia's got so much to replace. I think the caveat to that is pretty much everybody else does too, and the level of depth that you used to have might as well have existed on a different planet, certainly in a different era, because that's not the current era that we're in. One of the reasons, for instance, we're going to see Penn State show up in some of these like way too early top 25s as like a potential number 1 team, stuff like that, it's simply on the basis they just bring some guys back. Aller's coming back at quarterback, running backs returning. They're just bringing back some dudes, and so therefore some people are just going to stamp them at number 1 because of that. But most everybody else in college football, including the 2 teams that play for the title on Monday, everybody's looking to replace players, and some of it's just going to be young guys of, hey, get ready, big boy, because your chance is coming here right now. Some of that's just what this is about to be.
Yeah, Brandon, there's a lot of things that come to mind right there. I'll try not to sound like a grumpy middle-aged dude when we discuss it, but like for a lot of this, Brandon, I hate it that you sit there and we did this exercise on hedges before the hedges with Kaylee Mansell this week, where I looked at I was trying to be very frank with our audience, Brandon. I was like, okay, see those top 5, top 6 names there? Those will probably cost about $6 or $7 million for one individual team to sign. Georgia's not going to sign that many. If we follow the revenue sharing models that will be around in July, that you got $20.5 million. Well, I'm looking at the top 5 or 6 2026 targets that Georgia is really after, and it might cost $7 million to sign all of those names, Brandon. And you see that and you go, well, that's over a third of your roster. That won't happen. I love the discussion you had about Jalen Carter. The one thing I would kind of caveat that a little bit is schools are going to be a little tricky with that. Like, let's say you pay somebody $3 million a year or $2 million a year to come in and be your next big thing. One thing you might get with that, with what you pay for, is you might get two, maybe not 3, because we saw that happen with Walter Nolan this past year at Ole Miss, where you're going to have to buy somebody out of that NIL deal or whatever collective deal that was struck there. And we saw that with Damon Wilson. That made some guys shy away. But you bring up Carter, and yeah, you're right. You're going to have to be slick with it. You're going to have to make him a rotational starter, a slash starter. But the gobs and gobs of riches you think about there, well, you go, why in the world did Jalen Carter not start as a freshman? And then you go, well, Devontae Wyatt, first-round pick, Jordan Davis, first-round pick. And you go, well, it maybe makes a little bit more sense. I mean, even guys like Nazir Stackhouse were still around at the same time Carter was as well. So, yeah, there's a reason why he didn't start, but just barely because of that first-round talent. But and again, Brandon, it is the way of the world. I've talked to more because these guys, Brandon, this is how it starts. These players now have access to NIL, which is great, even high school players. And they get these trading card deals. And a lot of these trading card deals are associated with agents. And that's kind of where it starts a little bit. And now you start hearing numbers about how much a big-time quarterback will cost. 2.5, 3.5 million for the first year per annual deal. And then you start hearing other people say, well, if you pay that much for that, you got to kind of try and save money with your class in other areas, or you got to try and find discounts. Brandon, it all seems rather distasteful to my palate. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that, there's a lot about the sort of the era we're currently in that I may not love, but at the same time, I don't think it's always something we have to be afraid of either. In fact, we kind of talked about this a little bit before you joined us. We obviously saw the photo this week. In fact, you shared this on your own X platform account of Kirby Smart in home with Jared Curtis. Now, at face value, there's the story there of, well, this is a priority for Georgia in this class of 2026. Georgia has a needed quarterback. They're making a heavy pursuit of Curtis, trying to regain the commitment after having once had it. But there's also, as I said a little earlier, the kind of symbolic value of that photo, which is in an NIL age, Kirby being in Curtis's home suggests that Georgia expects to be just as competitive as anybody else and that sort of thing, because there are a lot of Georgia fans who are sort of wondering, does my team have access to the money that allows Georgia to spend as big as anyone else? Well, if it didn't, I don't know that Kirby's even in Curtis's living room right now. Now, they may not win the commitment. Obviously, we've seen Georgia come up short in a couple of quarterback, competitions with recruits the last couple of years. But certainly Kirby in January, being in Jared's home like that, suggests that Georgia expects to put an offer together that's just as lucrative as anybody else. And I kind of take some meaning in that. Do you?
Yeah, I think, Brandon, first of all, there's a reason for Georgia to be in the mix, even if they do start cutting checks or whatever with the best in the country, Brandon. There's a reason for that. There's a long-standing tie with the University of Georgia. I know at least one of the family favorites for Georgia family favorites for Curtis has always been Georgia, really from the first time they were around Kirby Smart and they saw Kirby at a practice. I think it's more like to deal with your imagery, you're painting there, Brandon. I think it's more of like we're planting our flag and like we're going to play ball here. And you start thinking about the numbers and people will like, oh gosh, Georgia, I don't know if you've seen the one the meme going around social media recently where it's a Price is Right image and there's a bunch of figures positioned and they're playing the bidding game, how you get onto the stage with Bob Barker, and it's got like all these NIL bids, and it's got Ohio State, it's got another school, it's got USC, it's got Texas, and it's got Georgia with the $1 bid trying to win. Yeah. I don't know if you saw that. I thought that was pretty funny, even considering the world we live in. But like people will like, well, there's no way Georgia's going to pay that much money for a quarterback. Well, you start there and you think, well, Georgia was allocating a lot of funds to a quarterback in Carson Beck this year as their starter. Perhaps some of that allocation might be down the line for your quarterback in the future. I think that's interesting to think about in terms of you look what Georgia did in the 2025 class. I believe they got Hezekiah Malinder-Hale and Ryan Montgomery at a considerable discount, especially for like Montgomery, who was a top 10 quarterback in the country. So I think you've got a little something there. You've got Gunner and Ryan who came into Georgia prior to the days of this widespread NIL. Brandon, you start looking around and like the top quarterbacks you put your ear to what you're hearing in the whispers on the trail, Brandon, and the numbers are like, you saw what happened with the Michigan quarterback. You've seen what Nico Iamaleava has gotten to Tennessee, and you see when he moves on, those funds will probably be available for their 2026 5-star that they already have committed as well. So like you see all those things and you're like, that's probably the going rate for a 5-star quarterback right now, especially considering guys in the portal are getting $4 million per year and plus. So that's what the numbers say they will be like. Will Georgia end up getting a discount, so to speak, on another quarterback moving forward? We will wait and see on that one. But there's just a lot of stuff swirling around right now that kind of thinks when you're thinking roster rebuild and how you're trying to change and, energize the program, gets a little different. I do know one thing, Brendan. I'm around a lot of those swanky folks, those McGill Society folks, and those Silver Circle guys. And I often hear this where they say something like, is this the guy that Georgia should pay for? I do hear that as a popular question, Brandon. It used to be, I don't know your experiences, but I used to hear from like devout boosters and like diehard dogs. They're like, it used to be, we're going to get this guy. Can Georgia get this guy? And now it has evolved to, is this the type of guy we should all pay for? Meaning, I guess, all of the boosters in the program that are powering the collectives.
But in simple language, though, the fact that Georgia's in home with Curtis suggests they want to play the money game, does it or doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah, I would think we will say this, Brandon. I think Georgia and Kirby they're being very thorough with the quarterback position for this class, simply for the fact that you've seen a lot of recent offers that suggest. And I guess it helps Georgia because Curtis is not committed at the time, but they're offering like Diabell out of South Florida American Heritage, who's currently a Texas commit. They've offered probably, Brandon, one of the most intriguing offers of the last 4 or 5 months for me is a young man named Keisian Henderson, who's out of Texas. And he's currently committed to Houston, Brandon. And we've watched his evolution from seeing him at the Future 50, where he was like, I can be a tight end, I can be a receiver, I play quarterback too, to he's gone to every evaluation opportunity, Brandon, and he's looked like the best quarterback there. He was the best quarterback at the All-American game in San Antonio this year. Of course, they're letting juniors play in that game when a lot of the other high-profile seniors didn't want to show up for that game anymore because they were already embedded with their college teams. But like this young man, electric, dual threat, currently committed to Houston. He's one of those guys that I think is going to rise up the ranks and be that guy, kind of like, I mean, it sounds crazy to think about it, but I think he's a guy. You remember back in the day when Justin Fields kind of rose out of nowhere to the number 1, number 2, number 3 quarterback in the country over like the first 6 months of his junior year before his senior season. I think you're going to see that with Mr. Henderson out of Texas. And that's a guy that Georgia has been talking to for a while that they finally offered this week. And I know it sounds like you look at a lot of the guys Georgia has offered, there's a lot more of a tendency towards those dual threats because all these reminders that Georgia keeps seeing in these big football games, Alabama, you saw it with Notre Dame as well, how much different it makes an offense when you have a dual threat.
Let me finish with this. I want to be respectful of your time. Last week I was in Stegman Coliseum. You saw the recruits that were there for Junior Day kind of come filing in. Of course, one of those photos people have seen, the 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson. Kirby Smart getting in some time with him. I guess just to finish off our conversation today, give me an update on kind of where Atkinson is on the other side of that visit, and if you want to kind of broaden that out to anything else from the sort of Junior Day festivities. Yeah, there you go. Great job by our folks running the show here today. You see Atkinson and Kirby in a nice photo there enjoying the basketball game. Georgia, of course, coming up a little bit short on the court, but nonetheless, good day for recruiting it appeared to be. Give me an update on Atkinson and give me a thought here kind of on the Junior Day in total.
Yeah. First of all, Junior Days are important now because some of these cases, you're really supercharging the relationship in terms of, hey, you can get on campus. This is your turn. Your class is finally the next class up, so it doesn't need to be as frantic. It doesn't need to be as kind of fast food drive-through visits on game days or at camps or something like that. They realize that they're now the priorities. Kamari Books, a guy will have a story on DawgNation.com this morning about at North Oconee, told me he's really felt a difference, not only since his great state championship game performance, but since January rolled around and Junior Days are here. With Atkinson, Brandon, you look at it, and I think it'll be fascinating. Probably the most interesting storyline of the cycle is with Georgia considering NIL here. Will they be able to sign their top offensive target in Curtis, their top defensive target in Atkinson? And you know what that might say, whether it's the direction of the program in terms of Atkinson, who would continue that defensive signature of Kirby Smart's best teams, or would it be kind of like the Josh Allen type quarterback? That's who most often Jared Curtis is compared to for the arm, the running ability, the size, to kind of keep things going forward. We know this about Atkinson. We know NIL is not going to be the chief reason for his decision. It's relationships and development. Brandon, I think Georgia would be the top dog, no pun intended, in both of those aspects in terms of anybody that's recruiting Atkinson. He's going to be in Oregon this weekend. Georgia got the first junior day visit. I think it was interesting for DawgNation to know, we wrote that story last Sunday coming out of his visit, that he said he thought Georgia turned the visit up a few levels in terms of turn the attention up a few levels, because Brandon, he's probably been to Georgia 20 times in his career, and he sees things new. He saw more personal things this time that made him think that he had the quote for me that says, "They really want me bad about the dogs." You see him in that video, Brandon, that gentleman he's hugging right there in the button-down shirt. That's Marcus Howard, a guy that's been training him for forever. Marcus has been telling me that Tyler is a dog before he was even recruited by the Dogs. I think you sit there and you look at Atkinson, that's going to be a big kind of bell cow for the 2026 class in terms of where he winds up, kind of continuing Georgia's run with those elite linebackers. And Brandon, we've said it before, this young man, really, really special. I do feel very confident. I do not lightly throw this around, but I do think he's the best linebacker prospect from the state of Georgia since the great Roquan Smith. And that's really all we need to talk about in terms of Atkinson. And we hear him described as a must sign, a must priority. I think the main thing with Atkinson, Brandon, is now he's so talented, but he is a culture setter in the locker room. You know, we saw what happened with kind of like Jack Sawyer and how he was kind of the heartbeat of the Ohio State team. And then Georgia teams of the years past, Cedric Von Prawn, Nolan Smith, guys like that. I think Atkinson could be that type of guy in Athens.
Really interesting stuff, Jeff. Appreciate your time here today. We'll look forward to reading plenty more from you, including a great story from Kamari Brooks coming up here. So we'll look forward to that at DawgNation.com. Back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, very soon as well.
Thank you, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, if you want the great recruiting coverage of Jeff Sentell delivered right to your email inbox, great way to do that is with a brand new, completely reinvented, if you will, upgraded DawgNation newsletter. We call it our Hunker Download. You can find out more about it and sign up to receive it by going to DawgNation.com/newsletter. DawgNation.com/newsletter. You'll get more on that today. Great way to be a part of Jeff's recruiting coverage. Connor, Mike, the entire DawgNation team, all the great stuff there at DawgNation.com. The best of it sent right to your email inbox. It's an email you'll love to receive each and every day. I'm a part of it too. DawgNation.com/newsletter to sign up for our Hunker Download delivered right to you every day. And with that said, kind of go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, a couple of things here. I believe next week we're going to have a really fun announcement as it relates to our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And our friends from Kroger, this is going to be a really, really exciting giveaway. Cannot wait to tell you more about that. All of that coming up next week. Going to be a really, really big deal. So I believe it's Monday's show. We'll give you more of this. So stay tuned to that on Monday. And, of course, check out Jessica Slater, a great travel agent. She can help you book your Royal Caribbean cruise, including our DawgNation cruise. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater at dreamvacations.com. I want to mention something else about our cruise here in a second. Let me, for now, though, get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I wanted to give you this. So I've been following the story as of late as it relates to Liam Cohen. Do you know who that is? This is the, I guess, former two-time Kentucky offensive coordinator. Cohen's got a sort of a strange history in Lexington in that he came there, became the offensive coordinator, had success, left to go to the NFL, then came back to Kentucky, and then left again. I think this is the guy that Brock Vandagriff probably thought he was going to have a chance to work with, and he didn't. You know, Cohen, like a lot of coaches these days, if you got a chance to go to the NFL, that's where it seems like you want to go. College obviously coming with a lot of headaches. But apparently Cohen's time in the NFL is paying off for him, because it certainly looks like, and I think this is about to be official if it's not already, that Liam Cohen is going to be the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. That it was going to maybe stay in Tampa as an offensive coordinator, maybe get a lot of money for doing so, but instead going to be hired as OC, try to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence here and kind of resurrect a Jacksonville franchise that obviously has had its issues. So Cohen now an NFL head coach. Now, the reason why I tell you this is simply this. In addition to a former SEC guy gets a head coaching job, I think it's really important to kind of keep this in mind when it comes to the pool of offensive minds that are out there in college football and how fast-tracked a lot of these dudes are. Because a hot topic for us, many Georgia fans, kind of speaking about dissatisfaction with Mike Bobo. And what we've said is, well, of course, the Georgia offense needs to improve. The statistics tell that story. We haven't been as adamant as others are. You need immediate change here. We think that Mike Bobo is a guy that can bring about improvement for UGA. We still, for the most part, kind of back Bobo as Georgia's offensive coordinator. But one of the things that comes up for those who would like to see change is, okay, well, who do you replace him with? And I just think it's important to note, whether it be a guy like Kenny Dillingham, who is a very young head coach, this year became the first head coach born in the 90s to coach in a bowl game. But that's a guy that just a couple of years ago, he's working with Dan Lanning as Oregon's offensive coordinator. Now he's at Arizona State. A guy like Liam Cohen, who was not really all that famous, working as Kentucky's offensive coordinator. Now he's the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, at least he's about to be. That for these sharp offensive minds, they are on such a fast track, even as very young, gentlemen, on such a fast track to become head coaches, that the pool of coordinators that you think you can hire is never going to be quite as wide as you imagine it might be. Defensive coordinators a little bit different. It seems like both at the college and pro level, a lot of those guys sometimes are slow to be hired as head coaches. On the offensive side, man, it's just hard to hold on to those coordinators. Just something worth paying attention to. Liam Cohen now looks like he's on his way to being the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, Mel Kiper is out with his first mock draft here for the 2025 NFL Draft. Connor Riley's got a good story about this, DawgNation.com. And what this brings to mind for me is that, a lot to celebrate for Georgia fans, because you may have 3 Georgia players go in, very high fashion here in kind of the first half of this first round of the NFL Draft. Malachi Starks, the safety, Mikael Williams, Jalen Walker, all 3 guys from this Georgia defense may go very high in this NFL Draft. And one of the things that I love, and this is not an ad read, this is me being authentic, is that my favorite moment of our Dog Nation cruise, it's been our tradition, just sort of, the first year it just sort of worked out this way, and ever since then we've kind of planned this specifically, is our final night's a huge NFL Draft party. And y'all, we give away autographed jerseys, and we do all this stuff. It's so much fun. And the best part is all of the hooping and hollering, the cheering that you hear when these Georgia players get drafted. And to think that we may see 3 Georgia names go up near the front of this NFL Draft, that is going to make our draft party so much fun on the final night of that Dog Nation cruise this year on Utopia of the Seas. Can't wait for that. It's such a cool experience. It's one of those things I wish we could bottle that up and give every Georgia fan a chance to experience what we experienced together on board Utopia of the Seas coming up in April. It's going to be a great time. I'll also finish our cruise around the SEC by saying, tough one for Georgia tomorrow. Obviously trying to break a 3-game skid here against number 5 Florida that fought back from behind to beat South Carolina earlier this week. So tough game for Georgia, trying to sort of right the ship here. A lot of Georgia fans, rightly so, pretty disappointed by what they saw from their team at Arkansas this week. College basketball sometimes has a way of surprising us. Can Georgia go into the O-Dome and perhaps shock the world against Florida? If I'm a betting man, I'd almost probably say no right now, but I won't count them out either. So Georgia has its chance to bounce back, but just to be frank, it's got to play a lot better tomorrow than it did earlier this week, and frankly, than it has for most of this 3-game stretch. And in the case of Florida, similar level of competition to the loss at Tennessee and the home loss versus number 1 Auburn last week. So tough task for Georgia, but that is just life right now in this rugged SEC, one of the deepest basketball conferences of all time. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And time now, we'll do our long finish here, presented by the Finnish Long Drink. We always love the chance to do that. And, of course, the long drink, long finish sometimes gives us a chance to look ahead to the week to come. And what a week it's going to be next week for Dog Nation in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. Want to kind of lay the groundwork for some of this and preview that right now. Want to bring in our good friend Kaylee Manziel. Now, before we kind of get this going with Kaylee, we also have to say that last night we had a little bit of a little Dog Nation get-together. We don't really do a Christmas party here around Dog Nation because Christmas kind of comes right in the middle of a big, hopefully, playoff push for Georgia, things like that. A lot of times we'll kind of get together for a little team outing kind of, after the season is done. So last night we all got together at Top Golf. And Kaylee, as we bring you on here, I got to say, very impressed by your swing. One of the better swings last night. You and our producer, Jay Black, both, I thought were swinging the clubs about as well as anybody. So shout out to you. Good-looking golf swing there last night.
That's a huge compliment. I told Connor before it happened, I said, this can go either way. I was like, either I'm going to crush it out there or it's going to go straight behind me every single time. So, but I mean, your compliment means the most. I think when you got there and you said something, that's when I started messing up because it was just like the highest honor and I didn't want to disappoint you. So to hear you say that this morning means everything to me. And I was kind of hoping that you might bring it up. So.
Yeah, we had a good time. It was fun. You're a good athlete. You played softball and all that kind of stuff. So swinging a golf club's
it is not the same.
Not
even close.
But when it comes to tasks like that, you've accomplished plenty of great things like that.
The problem with this, you can't be consistently good at it, and I hate that. A lot of it's outside of your control, and I am a control freak. So.
But it is weird though that the stationary. You would think a stationary ball would be easier to hit than a moving ball, like a baseball or softball or something like that. But somehow golf doesn't quite work out that way. But it was certainly nice to see our colleagues kind of relax last night, having a good time. We don't all get together like that very much. We live in different places, and everybody's busy. So it's kind of nice, other than our good friend Cody Chaffins, who wasn't able to be there, kind of nice to see everybody kind of coming together.
Yeah, and we got to celebrate a birthday, even if he was embarrassed. It's nice when you get everybody outside the work setting, especially in a competitive setting, too. I feel like you learn a lot about people.
Well, speaking of learning a lot about people, that's what you're going to be tasked with doing next week. DawgNation going to be live at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. Is it also Mardi Gras in Mobile? Is that going on Tier 2?
Yeah, I learned last year that Mobile is actually the birthplace,
it is.
The origin of Mardi Gras. So when we went last year, and there's purple and yellow and green everywhere. So I do believe that these two events happen at the same time.
Yeah, so we'll get maybe a little bit of a Mardi Gras update from you on the streets of Mobile, but also a little Senior Bowl coverage there too. For people who've never seen this and maybe not really all that aware of what it is, give us a little bit of a taste of what it's going to be like for DawgNation in Mobile next week.
Yeah, I think of it as like your classic all-star game, but it's the Senior Bowl. The Reese's Senior Bowl does it right. There's going to be 7 Georgia players this year: Dan Jackson, Tiernan Ingram, Dawkins, Smile Munden, Tate Ratledge, Jared Wilson, Trevor Etienne, Arian Smith, guys who are more than likely going to be drafted, but this is a great chance for them to improve their draft stock. This is typically your guys that are going to go 2nd, 3rd, and 4th that are trying to work their way up, so they'll go through 3 days of practice. They'll be able to have those Indy-like drills in the earlier days that you'll see more at the combine. And the next 2 days, it's real practice. It's the O-line, D-line battles, the 7-on-7, 11-on-11, and it's a really good way to have NFL scouts see these guys in a game-type setting, because when you get to the combine, it's all measurements, it's all about your speed, it's all that you can do. But the Senior Bowl is so good for some of these players that aren't necessarily going to measure or test well, for scouts to see them in an actual game-like setting, and how well can you adjust and adapt to guys that you've never played with before. So it's a really good opportunity for the 7 guys that will be competing for Georgia.
And it's also, as someone like me who is admittedly much more of a college fan than a pro fan, my favorite part about it's also kind of what I sort of think of as like the exit interviews, players that are no longer at Georgia. Now it can be said type stuff of, okay, talk to a Trevor Etienne or a Tyrone Ingham Dawkins. How close did you come to coming back?
Yeah.
Ultimately, what was your decision around some of that? And, kind of watching how the Georgia season concluded, what did it feel like to be on the inside of that? We have our perspective, what we saw from the outside, but as a player on that team, seeing the highs of winning the SEC championship, the lows of not quite finishing in the college football playoff the way that you wanted to, what did it feel like? What did you take from that? My guess is a little bit more of a candid version of some of these Georgia players now that you don't have the coaching staff sort of peering over their shoulder and listening in on what they're saying. We may get some interesting stuff from some of these Georgia players also kind of recounting their time at UGA too, right?
Oh, I mean, that was definitely one of the biggest realizations I had last year, because you sit and you listen to these guys in post-game press conferences, and you can tell that they're being really careful with their words, but you see a completely different side of them, because they're no longer Georgia's responsibility
That's
anymore.
right.
Their only responsibility is themselves, so they tend to let loose a little bit. So we will be able to ask some of those tougher questions, like to a Trevor Etienne with what happened, why did you decide not to come back, or asking a guy like Tate Ratledge, who was really close with Carson Beck for a lot of time, like, how did you feel about everything that went down? So we're going to be able to ask those tougher questions, but also just see these guys a lot more relaxed. And, we are going to get real one-on-one time with them that we don't typically get. So DawgNation, if there is anything in particular that you want to hear about, something that's been on your mind, feel free to put it in the comments, and we'll take just about anything, because this is really your last opportunity to find out things about these guys and, their best Kirby Smart impressions and things like that. So let us know in the comments, and we'll use it.
All right, so Kaylee, you'll come on with us next week, talk more about this?
Of course I will.
I look forward to that. Enjoy your weekend, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Good stuff there from Kaylee Manziel, part of our Long Drink, Long Finish. And, of course, if you want to enjoy your weekend, too, one of the great ways to do that is to stock up on some Finnish long drink. Now, there are all kinds of varieties of the Finnish long drink out there. There's the long drink cranberry, which my wife loves. There's the long drink, sort of the traditional citrus. That's my favorite. It's the blue can. Grapefruit-flavored gin kick. There's also the peach-flavored version. Long drink strong, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. All kinds of great options for you. You can find them out online. Longdrink.com. It's thelongdrink.com. That's the website. Sometimes I speak a little too fast. Thelongdrink.com. You can check that out today. And while I'm in the mood for some shouts out, let me also say thanks to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau here, too, for being a part of so much of what DawgNation does here. You need insurance. Legally, you have to have it when it comes to your home insurance, your auto insurance, things like that. So choosing the right company to work with is obviously the right choice, smart decision to sort of figure out who the best for you is. We would say work with a company that's always the home team. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is. Agents and claims adjusters and friendly folks living and working in Georgia just like you, taking care of Georgians. They've been doing that for a long time. They want to do that for you. You can give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. All right, so it was promised, and now it is here. Eddie the Blind Squirrel is back. Eddie's been kind of hiding under the desk all day long here. Eddie makes his triumphant return, and Eddie has brought something with him. Eddie has brought $1 million bill. Why does Eddie have $1 million bill? What is this? What is going on here? We may find out in the future. By the way, this is not legal tender. So this is ceremonial. No one break in to take this. But Eddie has brought $1 million bill to the set here at DawgNation Daily. What could that be about? Maybe we'll find out in the future there on that, but good to have Eddie back. How about a golden shoe for today? And this comes from our buddy, you see him, Woodland Revival, sometimes on our YouTube page, UGA Nation 412. This is the guy that made the beautiful DawgNation Daily, nice sign, wood sign that we have on our set. He made this, and he wrote in to say, hey, BA, I enjoy the snow. He's living in Pittsburgh. Just want to show you how cold it was last night in Pittsburgh. How about minus 13 degrees? I took a mug of hot water, threw it in the air. It quickly condenses into water droplets, turned into steam, and drifted away. And sure enough, he sent me a video of that. You see the photo there of that water essentially vaporizing just like that. And nice picture of our buddy Woodland Revivals here, too, and the gorgeous piece that he made for us. How nice is that, by the way? One of my prized possessions for sure. So many folks have been so kind to give us nice stuff over the years. Certainly appreciate that. An incredible video sent to me on X via UGA Nation and our buddy Woodland Revival. So excellent, excellent stuff there. Lousy, stinking Gators, nothing as excellent for them. How about 1,539 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. See you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily and $1 Million Eddie. We will see you then. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. So make sure you check them out. We'll get some of your comments here just for a couple of minutes. Eugene Marine says, Eddie better be turning that $1 million into the collective. You never know what may be going on there. You never know. UJ Marion also says that it could get ugly against Florida if Georgia starts off cold. Yeah, I mean, look, Georgia's got to play better. Now, they certainly are capable of it. I mean, the one thing that you got to keep in mind is that, I know the front court sort of let Georgia down a little bit the other night, but that's still Georgia's biggest strength, protecting the front of the rim with Surreal, hopefully being a force on the glass. And I tell you, in the midst of kind of a rough stretch for Georgia, one of the things that is kind of coming into focus a little bit more is, Asa Newell's kind of got that little baby hook shot, kind of, in the low block area, in the painted area, sometimes even like 5, 6, 7 feet out. He's kind of figuring that move out. I know he wants to be a three-point shooter because that's what he thinks the the NBA draft scouts want him to do. But his best value to Georgia is that with that little baby hook down there in the painted area. And, that can be Georgia's source for easy baskets. We'll see if some of that shows up against Florida. Boy, around here, obviously, hating those lousy stinging Gators, there'd be no better bounce-back win for Georgia than against the team from Florida. O-Dome probably be rocking. That's a pretty good Florida team right now. You think about, Auburn and some of these teams we sort of think of with like championship potential. This is a Florida team based on its record and how it's played. They're certainly expecting to make a deep run in March. Pizza Man says that Damon Wilson must have gotten paid big money by Missouri. Yeah, I mean, like the one thing we've seen from Missouri is that they have been very aggressive about putting some big dollars towards a small number of players. And I would say it's worked out for them for the most part. They're far more relevant than they had been. They began the year sort of a fringe playoff contender. Didn't quite live up to that, but they also didn't have a terrible season either. And in 2023, they were a top 10 team to beat Ohio State in a bowl game. So Missouri's NIL strategy for the most part is working. They probably can't be Ohio State, probably don't have Texas money, but they've got money, and they're putting it towards what they view are a few game-changing players. And for the most part, it's kind of working. Alan Hampton says that Gunner Stockton looked calm and collected versus Texas. He says that Arch Manning looked a bit overwhelmed versus Georgia. Yeah, I don't want to make too much of it, but I do notice what Alan says that he's noticed, which is that, you saw Arch Manning come into games, kind of cough up the ball a couple of times, the sort of wide-eyed look that he had in October. I believe that Manning is probably going to be a good quarterback, but nothing's a given. And the fact that some of the games in which Manning did enter, they didn't exactly go great, that probably should serve as a bit of a reminder that nothing is given in all this situation. Kayla Meyer says that Andrew Jones was my favorite player growing up. He's a Hall of Famer, easy in my book. What say you, BA? Yeah, I think that Andrew Jones is a Hall of Famer. And I believe it was Chipper Jones the other day who said this, that if Andrew had played for the Yankees, Chipper's belief is that Andrew would have been in. And I think there's an element of this that just seems true, that players that play for certain major league franchises have just historically gotten more attention. And, frankly, a lot of that attention has sort of come from the amplification by the local media. A lot of local coverage of the New York Yankees, big market, of course, but a lot of local coverage of the Yankees. And that local coverage made big stars out of the old-timers like Mantle and DiMaggio, but, the more modern-day players like Jeter and Mariano Rivera, Aaron Judge now, that they just did a really good job of putting a spotlight on their guys. And to be honest with you, I think that you're right, Jones should be in. I think that Chipper's right, Andrew probably would be in had he played for a different franchise, and the kind of coverage that those franchises might would have gotten. And the third point on that is, this is part of the reason why we do DawgNation Daily the way we do. We make no bones about it. I got a Georgia shirt on today. I almost always wear one. We do a very Georgia-centric show for Georgia. So if there's a chance that a Georgia player can win the Heisman Trophy, we're going to hype it up. If there's a chance that Georgia should be in the playoff, we're going to hype it up. If there's a chance that a Georgia player could have a breakout season and be among the best in the country, we're going to hype that up. Part of that's just because we like hype and fun stuff and, razzle-dazzle and things like that. but also for the very thing that Chipper Jones brought up about Andrew Jones. If we don't toot the horn for Georgia, who will, right? In places like New York and Boston, to a certain extent maybe L.A., Chicago for sure, in these media markets, those local, whether it be radio, TV, print, whatever, the local folks in those markets amplifying their players, and you reap benefits from that. More of your guys probably going to the Hall of Fame. And in a place like Atlanta, which was probably for a long time kind of underserved from a media standpoint, especially if you want to go back to like the 90s, things like that, probably not as much media to meet the demand that existed for. That's changing now, of course. But at one point in time, there probably was more sports than there was media covering it, if you want to go back decades ago. I don't know that our local athletes always got amplified like they could. And that's the byproduct that is guys like Andrew Jones aren't in the Hall of Fame. I think that's probably true. Dale Murphy the same way. Let's see what else. What else is going on? Jim K says Damon Wilson made a Bear Alexander mistake. Maybe so, but the Missouri defenses haven't been bad defenses. John Paul Williams says that he disagrees. He doesn't think Missouri is any more relevant than they've been in the past. Yeah, but like I said, in 2023, they were a top 10 team. They played Georgia within single digits. This year, they took a step back compared to their preseason expectation. But the fact those preseason expectations even existed, to me, says something. Georgia obviously did not play Missouri this year, but over the course of the last few years, Missouri has been about the most consistently tough game Georgia's played. Wildman Slayer also says that Andrew Jones was the best outfielder he's seen. He says he could hit the fastball, but he did have trouble with the curveball. Yeah, so I would say that, Andrew Jones was not among the best hitters of his generation, but when you factor in the offense he did provide compared to the defense, I would say he's among the best hitting great defensive, if you follow me here, he's among the best hitting great defensive outfielders that we've seen. I think one of the things that Andrew also suffered from a little bit is, he kind of played at a time in which I think the analytics age was sort of figuring out some of the offensive stuff. This is Moneyball era for like on-base percentage and slugging percentage. Some of the analytic stuff was kind of coming into focus offensively. I don't think we had figured out the defensive part of that at all. That was still really sort of early days of some of that. And I think that we saw Andrew chasing down everything, playing, the one thing you'll remember as a Braves fan if you attended games, Andrew played so shallow. He looked like, if you ever watch like girls softball or something like that, for kids, we have like the little rover, like the little, sort of, just somebody just almost playing, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but almost like playing right behind second base sometimes, like just very, very, right in the front of the grass, very, very shallow center field, but you could not hit the ball over his head. So we saw Andrew making a lot of these kinds of catches, but I don't think, had the proper analytics at the time to quantify just how good of a defensive outfielder he really was. Adam J says, do any of y'all remember Otis Nixon? I do, for sure. Jim K also pointing out, the very shallow way in which Andrew played center field. I don't know that TV always did that justice, because sometimes you can't really tell depth on television. I don't know that TV would have shown you that. Plus, we don't really do like the all-22 shot for baseball very much, although maybe they, especially in the era of the shift, they probably should have done more of that. Like the sort of spider cam thing, like looking down on the field, you couldn't really tell on TV how shallow Andrew was playing. But if you went to a game, it was wild. You don't see anybody line up like that anymore. Let us see what else. Let me go to Facebook just for a moment. By the way, I meant to mention this during the regular show and just blasted right past it. conference championship games here this weekend. Obviously, like I said, I had that on the rundown, just blew right past it. Looking forward to these two games. To me, like, this is a better weekend than the Super Bowl because I like weekends that have multiple games. It's the same issue you have on Monday night with the national championship. College football is a little bit of a volume sport where it's kind of nice to have, like, on a regular Saturday, you have like 40 or 50 games. Obviously, you get down to the end, you only have the one game. Part of the reason why sometimes the national championship doesn't feel like college football is because, college football is not really a standalone sport where there's just like the one game. We love the whole buffet menu of all the games. NFL is a little bit like that too, where like wild card weekend, you got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday now. I'm sorry, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I meant to say. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Divisional round gives you 4 games. This is sort of our last big this is sort of our last weekend with multiple games. Obviously, the Super Bowl is just sort of a standalone event. And no surprise here, we're rooting for Philadelphia. I think that Jaden Daniels as a rookie quarterback has been outstanding. I would say against this Eagles defense, my guess is he probably falls on hard times. I think it's tough to be a rookie quarterback in this setting. Daniels has passed every test. Among the best young quarterbacks we've seen in recent years. Probably don't like him in this spot on Sunday. And in the case of Kansas City and Buffalo, my belief about the Chiefs is they've been living on kind of the razor's edge all year long, winning a lot of narrow, close games. To me, that is not a very predictive stat for future success. I think this could be either the Buffalo gets them, although as you saw last week from like the slide and stuff like that, boy, it seems like every break in the world goes Kansas City's way. So, you may have to – your margin of victory may have to be beyond the margin of funny officiating. You may have to sort of increase your margin to sort of account for that. As we lost our $1 million there for a second, you may have to account for that a little bit. But I do think the Buffalo – I picked against Kansas City last week and I was wrong. But I may go back to that well again this week. Give me a Buffalo-Philadelphia Super Bowl. Would that be fun for you? It would be for me. I'll take Buffalo and Philadelphia in the Super Bowl. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Ulysses Dunning's checking out. Ulysses, appreciate you being here. Eric Bill Sanders checking out too. Bill, have a great day. We're going to check out here in a minute as well. Kirk Schultz, by the way, says he lives in Oregon, says it's surprising how many times I hear people say go dogs to me out here, dog fans in duck country. I think it has been kind of neat, and I don't know if this is a new phenomenon or not, but it seems like the brand of Georgia has really grown. The size of the fan base has really grown where you do see Georgia fans everywhere. It's really amazing. I hear people telling stories all the time about international travel, things like that, where they'll have Georgia gear on, and Georgia fans will come up to them there, even like Europe and places like that. So it does seem like you see some of that going on. Matt Rukavina would like to see the national title game moved off of a Monday. I wouldn't hate that either. Big thing for me is you got to just move it up. You got to move everything up. And by up, I mean a little closer to the end of the regular season. There's too much of a layoff. And the truth is like there have been a lot of years in which even when the game itself was, in my mind, a fun one, where like if Georgia's not involved, like, I mean, my interest for college football on a Monday night in January is just different. It just is. That's a school night. That's just a different vibe than the weekend for whatever reason. William Camacho also has the Bills and Eagles in the Super Bowl. Admittedly, my Buffalo pick may be somewhat wishful thinking, and maybe my Philadelphia pick is too, but that is the case here right now. All right, let's bounce around the other comment section. We'll get ready to get out of here. West GA Dog fan says the Bills have already been penalized for rushing the passer. West GA, you may be about right on that. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker says nobody here in Oklahoma City cares about baseball. I think you're missing out if that's the case. I think the OKC folks are missing out because I would say baseball is a pretty fun sport. I would say that. Yeah, Randy Hall giving the numbers, 400-plus home runs for Jones, 10 Gold Gloves. You're going to kind of see the sort of Gold Glove level player doesn't have the 400 home runs, or the 400 home run guy who's maybe a liability with the glove on. But boy, he really brought both of those. And I will also admit this: I think I've probably gained appreciation for Jones as a player as time's gone on. I mean, there were probably moments in a Braves uniform where sometimes maybe Braves fans maybe got a little frustrated here and there. But yeah, I mean, but as time goes on, I think you appreciate the better chance of what that is. Garrison Tucker says, any chance DawgNation ever opens up a merch section on the website? So we are selling Georgia-branded stuff via the website. That may be all we're able to do for right now. But there is some Georgia-branded stuff on the website, I understand. Yeah, Garrison Tucker would like some DawgNation-branded stuff. Yeah, I would love to do more of that. Obviously, we'll do our T-shirts and things like that for some of the events that we do. But I think that's sort of kind of perhaps it right now. Blind Squirrel Sports checking out. Appreciate that. Jonathan Aaron asking about Patrick Mahomes. What happens if he wins a third straight Super Bowl? Yeah, I mean, I think you got to start having some real serious conversations about, greatest quarterback of all time, along with the Tom Brady and Joe Montana, I guess, is in there. Some of the other names that might get mentioned. But, I mean, as much as I'm sort of anti-Chiefs now, just a little bit kind of burned out by them, a third straight Super Bowl would be a remarkable accomplishment and would be the kind of thing that sort of differentiated Mahomes' resume in his legacy in a huge way. I think you're right about that. Adam J. says he wants a DawgNation sticker. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Speaking of stickers. So going back many months ago, shamefully almost a year ago, we did some contests, and I said, eventually I'm going to send something to people. I do have something to send. Now, y'all, I told you at the time I'm a disorganized mess. I wish I wasn't, but I am. This was all unofficial. This is just me trying to have some fun. But with my own dollars, my own money, I had something made. And I'm going to send it to you eventually. And so I may send something to other people too. So we may have some more fun with that. But I promised you I would. Did not promise you when it would happen. But if you participate in some of those contests, and if I've got your information, I may have some for you coming up pretty soon. So we shall see about that. All right, let's see. Anything else before we go? Adam J. asking about whatever happened to David Justice. I think he's still around. Not a very favorable portrayal in the movie Moneyball, if you've seen that. Not a very favorable portrayal there. But I think he's still around. Lance D. says that the game is going to hinge on the refs, and Mahomes has replaced Brady as the untouchable NFL player. Yeah, it seems like that slide rule drives me crazy, where every rule in the game already benefits the offense, and now a player like Mahomes is going to try to leverage it even more. I just find that aggravates me to no end. That aggravates me to no end. All right. Anything else before we go here today? Brian Whitaker checking out. Gary Holt wants to know more about Eddie. Something tells me in the months to come we may hear more about that. Perhaps in the months to come we may hear more about that. All right, we're going to go for now. Hey, y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy the football this weekend. Hopefully the Dogs will go down there and take care of business in Gainesville. Wouldn't that be nice? But we'll take care of business ourselves back here on Monday. Between now and then, though, check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Plumbing emergency, with these winter cold weather snaps, sometimes pipes burst, and obviously that creates a huge issue. Well, if you've got some sort of plumbing emergency like that, our friends at R.S. Andrews can serve you in that time of need. So find them online at rsandrews.com. The RS, of course, stands for Rapid Service, and Rapid Service is what you want in an emergency situation. So let RS Andrews provide that for you today. Online, rsandrews.com. Enjoy the weekend. Back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.